Chip Sampson is a business development and talent acquisition professional. He's going to be talking about the employment puzzle. He has more than 20 years of experience in the professional services and project team placement industry. During that time, he has developed long-term business relationships with a large number of employers and a network of contacts. Prior to that, he served 11 years in management roles over customer service and sales focused companies in the music and audio industry. He currently serves as the internship committee chair for the Austin Community College Continuing Education Vendor Advisory Board. That is too much to fit on a business card. And on the board of directors for Austin Up, a nonprofit focused on quality of life issues for Austin residents. Self-described as a teacher and creator, he has developed a series of programs based around the employment puzzle concept, designed to help job seekers put all the pieces together to more effectively reach their desired employment goals through a systematic approach with networking as a central principle. He has helped thousands of job seekers prepare and promote their credentials to potential employers. I now give you Chip. It is.
I am going to go ahead and share my screen and put this up there. Do you see the first slide? I'm going to put it in.
Yes, we see it. It's
great.
Good.
Okay. And so, as Kathy said, I call this the employment puzzle. I came across this concept because I have two now young adults. At the time were college students when I came up with this, and I was just struggling with how to describe to them what needed to happen to do a more effective job search. And as I was struggling to do that, I said, it's like a jigsaw puzzle. There's a whole bunch of different pieces, and you have to clearly understand each and every piece and how they fit together. You can't just like go out and say, here's me, hire me. And which is kind of, in fact, I'll jump right into it. That's kind of this slide. This is not an effective way to find a job. It might work. I actually remember in Austin one time in driving up 360 and seeing a sign that a homeless person was holding that said, we'll program in Java for food, which cracked me up. So it might work, but typically it doesn't. What you really need to do is focus on putting all those pieces together. Once I explained that to my kids, a light bulb went off, and I thought, well, maybe there's a whole process that could be built around this. So most people start off with their resume and their references. In fact, a lot of people only work on their resume and their references. I hear it time and time again where people say, I need to go out and look for a job, but I really have to get my resume just right before I do that. And then they apply online. That's really a futile way to go about looking for work for two reasons. One, your resume is only a tool. It is not you. It's not everything about you. And so if all you're using is that as a means to get somebody interested in you, you'll fall flat more times than you'll have success, unfortunately. One person came up to me at a meeting where I was giving this presentation and said, I've sent out 370 resumes and it's getting frustrating. And I flat out said to him, I said, you've probably received about 15, maybe 20 responses. And he said, how'd you know? I said, because 5% is the average response rate if all you're doing is shooting your resume out and submitting it online to open job opportunities. So I do want to say before I continue on, I'm looking at one screen. I used to have the chat up there, and that's where I saw Victoria had put a comment in there. Shannon and Kathy, I no longer see the chat, so if there's something in the chat that you think is something we need to bring up as a question to one of the slides I'm presenting, just let me know.
I'll do that.
Happy to pause and answer that.
I'll do that, no problem.
Otherwise, if you want, save all of your questions to the end, and I'll stay as long as you all want me to answer questions. So, why is it important to have a systematic approach? I'm in my, actually, I'm now, I guess, proud to say, I'm now in my 60s. Couldn't say that a couple months ago, but I know that a lot of people that I've met and seen at Launchpad Job Club are not straight out of school. They've been working for a while, and now they're looking for their next opportunity, either because of downsizing, now because of reduction in force over all this COVID stuff. But for whatever the reason is, we will change jobs on average 7 times throughout our career. And I thought this was kind of interesting because it follows exactly the number of jobs that I have, which means I'm just average, right? Some people change jobs more often. What really caught me, though, was that you'll pivot careers, which means you'll do something completely different from what you did before at least 3 times throughout that 30, 40-year career, or whatever the length of your career is. And pivoting definitely takes a more systematic approach than just moving from the exact same kind of job to another job. And so, again, more of a reason to have a systematic approach. What really, really struck me, though, as I dug into this research, is that people coming out of college right now, and as I said, I kind of was doing this research on behalf of my kids, people coming out of college right now will change jobs on average 15 times. That's more than twice what someone 40 to 60 would do. And they'll pivot careers 7 times. That kind of blew me away because that clearly shows that there's a change in the job market and the way things are done. And a lot of times when we're looking for work, we think of it in terms of, I want to get that next job and I'll be there, hopefully, for the rest of my career. The chances that that's going to happen, though, are somewhat slim. And it happens for many reasons that are beyond your control and have nothing to do with whether you're good at what you do. There are economic and other factors that will cause you to be looking for work. And again, this is why having a systematic approach is important. So, what is it based on? What is the employment puzzle based on? There's actually 3 key questions that I would say you should be asking yourself in advance of approaching the market and trying to apply. And the first is, who's in your network? The second is, what is your story? And those actually kind of work together and play off each other. And the third is, what value do you bring to an employer? And value and story play off of each other, as do value and network. And when I say they play off each other, I put this in here as a Venn diagram because it all works together. These are essentially what make up the pieces of the employment puzzle. We'll dive into those pieces a little bit further on in the presentation. But the key here is right at the intersection of that, that's where your ideal job is. And you'll notice that I underlined you and your in here because your job search is not about anybody except for you. You have to clearly understand who you are, what you want, and what you bring in order to get any employer to even take an interest in you. So this is kind of an odd thing to say, but your job search is not about the employer that has the job. It's about you understanding what you want and then going after only those types of jobs. So going back to what I said, most people will start with resume and references and submit those online. Essentially, what you're doing here is you're tipping the scales completely in the employer's favor. You send the resume in, maybe you send references, maybe not, depending on whether it asks for it. And then you sit and you wait. And you wonder, why haven't I heard anything? I was such a perfect match for that particular opportunity. Or I really wanted that job. It sounded interesting, but I haven't heard anything back. If you take the time to clearly build a network and understand what your story is, and clearly can demonstrate the value that you bring to an employer before you send this in, then you have completely tipped the scales in your favor. And that's what this employment puzzle is all about. It's understanding all the pieces and tipping the scale in your favor. So let's start with the first tenant, who's in your network. And the network is actually the four corners of a puzzle. We've all done a jigsaw puzzle before, I hope. Maybe we've done more now that we've been shut in. And if you've done one, you understand that one of the first things you need are the corners and then the edge pieces before you fill in the middle. Because the corners give you that frame of reference for what do I operate within? What are the borders of the extent of that puzzle? The corners and the corners are all about networking. The first one is a personal network. The second is a professional network. The third is an industry network. And the fourth is a social network. And we'll look at each one of these pieces in more detail. Let's start with looking at the personal network. Personal network's pretty straightforward. I think pretty easy for you to define in your head. It would be friends. Whoop. Why am I going up? Friends, family, maybe church groups if you attend a church. If you participate in any sports, which you probably don't as much lately as you may have, but other team members, not only on your team, but maybe on the other team if you're doing recreational sports. And when we're in a meeting, and I guess this could apply at home too, but the person on your left or the person on your right, a lot of times when you're in a situation where there are other people around, especially when you're at things like Launchpad Job Club, or you're in a situation where people are looking for work, all of the people that are there should become, or you should think of as part of your network. They may not have immediately what you're looking for, but they may be able to lead you or guide you towards somebody that does. So the second corner is the professional network. And those might be current supervisors if you're currently employed, and you have the type of relationship where you can actually discuss openly your interest in finding something different, either within that same company or outside of that company. Same thing with current coworkers, but also former supervisors and former coworkers. I would hope, and I know this is not the situation for everybody, but that you do everything you can in all of your previous employment situations to maintain to some degree a positive relationship and communication with former supervisors and former coworkers. Because when it comes time for you to look for your next job, they actually would be an excellent source of helping you find that and providing references for you. If you're in school or you're going back to retool particular skills, the professors and teachers in that environment should be considered part of your network. A lot of times, they either come from private sector previously, so they have contacts there, or they're in contact with a lot of people who are in the private sector, and they can refer some of their more engaged students into potential opportunities. And then sometimes you'll take training, either at your current job or, again, additional training to help build up a skill. And those trainers and educators are in exactly the same position as your professors. They have other contacts that they might be able to refer you toward. And then, of course, anybody who's in a professional capacity that may or may not do exactly the same thing you do. If they do the exact same thing you do, they are likely to have very good contacts. If they don't, they still might have professional contacts that can point you toward, that will lead you toward what you are seeking and what you want to do. The third piece is the industry network. An industry network is consists of, and again, some of this is all pre-COVID, industry meetup groups. However, these meetup groups are still meeting online, and you can make contacts in those. In Austin, one of the things I love about Austin is just the huge number of meetup groups that are out there for any type of industry that you might be interested in. If you're interested in moving to something completely new or doing a career pivot, you absolutely should start following and engaging with industry meetup groups so that you can learn more about that particular industry. Same thing with professional meetup groups. And there is a difference between an industry meetup group and a professional meetup group. An industry meetup group might be a meeting of manufacturers of computer equipment. A professional meetup group might be Java programmers, for example. They program in Java across a wide variety of industries, but they're all Java programmers. You want to try to identify any and all industry thought leaders in the industry you currently work in, or if you're pivoting, in the industry that you want to go to. And then you need to start to engage those thought leaders by using whatever social media platforms they're operating on to follow them, see the types of things that they're discussing and talking about, which will help further inform the research you need to do. And when and if appropriate, start to engage with them or respond to things that they're posting. Your response shouldn't be straight out of the gate, hey, I'm looking for a job in this industry. What can you tell me, or how can you help me? It should be more along the lines of, I saw your posting about such and such. I'm interested in this. I'd like to learn more about it. Can you recommend some resources? And what they're doing is they're giving you further information to do further research. What I do for my network contact list, and you can do it any way you like or see fit, is I just create a spreadsheet, and I'll track emails, the first and last name, company, title. If they have social media links, I'll put them in here so that I can follow them on those. I'll try to get a little bit of background and information on the individual, maybe where they went to school or other places that they've worked, particularly if they're places I might be interested in. And basically just kind of gather whatever detail you want and put it into some trackable device. There's lots of different choices for tracking. I'm just kind of a spreadsheet guy. I like spreadsheets. And you'll notice, if you look at the tabs down at the bottom, I hope you can see my cursor on the screen. I have a professional network tab, a personal network tab, and an industry network tab. So I kind of divide them across these different places. The reason being, when it's time for me to go approach the job market, I might start by working my professional network. Or if I'm less comfortable working the professional network, maybe I'll start by working the personal network and get comfortable with networking again before I jump over to the professional network. Now, if you're paying attention, you probably also noticed that that's only 3 corners. That's not 4 corners. The fourth one is the social network. And I distinguish between that because this is not so much gathering names and keeping a database of your network contacts. It's more about what you put out there and how you present yourself on your own individual personal social networks. Kathy said that networking in this process, that networking is the core concept. It really is. Social networking is important, but those previous 3 corners that I talked about, that's what's going to find you a job that you want. Contacting and keeping in touch with those folks in that network. And if you feel like you don't have a fully fledged, built out network, that's okay. You build it over time. So in social networking, what you want to do is use your personal branding information to update all of your social media profiles. We kind of put the cart a little bit before the horse here, because I'll talk about personal branding when we get to what is your story. But what will come out of your work in what is your story is a personal brand statement. It's basically you saying who you are and what you want and or like to do or what you're good at, and putting it all out on your social networks. You might definitely want to have that on your LinkedIn. You might want to do it on Instagram if you have an Instagram. You might want to do it on Facebook. I still say, LinkedIn is kind of the premier one for looking for work. But what's important about having some of these others, Twitter included, set up and putting your branding message on those is it shows consistency. I think this one probably we could drop. I don't know that anyone is using Snapchat at all, although I did put that on for, again, my kids, the college kids who were the ones primarily using Snapchat. The key is that you have consistency across whichever platforms you choose to use. In other words, your branding statement should be the same across all of them. And your picture should be, if not the same, similar. Like it's the same in these 3, it's pretty darn similar here. The reason for that is that all these systems are using algorithms to determine when a search is done for Chip Sampson, for example, are we finding the right Chip Sampson? And if you have that populated on several different platforms, then what will happen is the algorithms will see that in more than one instance and come away with a reasonable assurance that this is the right person that we're looking for when your name is searched. And I'm sure by now that one of the first things that any employer is going to do before they even call you, but if you've sent a resume to them, is they're going to go out and look at what is your presence or your profile or what are you putting out there on your social networks. And you want them to be able to find you. Sometimes that's a little bit more difficult. If your name is John Smith, that's going to be a little more difficult. You may want to come up with some ways to distinguish yourself in your social media profiles so that your information pops up and it lends credibility to what you're saying you can do in your resume or whatever your documents were that were submitted. It lends credibility if your social profile matches what's in those documents. Anybody have any questions about any of that before we jump into what is your story?
There aren't any questions on the chat box.
Okay, I'm going to keep going. So the second tenet is, what is your story? And this is where personal branding comes in. Um, I actually found myself in an unexpected job search in 2017, and I knew nothing about personal branding. But again, as I was doing my research, I began to realize how important this can be. And what I found about it is it's really difficult to create a brand statement. The way I went about doing it is I did some personal assessments. There are many of these out and available on the market, some paid and some free. A few of them are things like Strengths Finder. That's probably one of the more common ones. I did one called Persona Metrics, which I didn't put on here because it's a paid version, and I actually was able to do it through a negotiated agreement with the company. Standout 2.0, I believe, is a free one, and 16 Personalities is a free one. There's 3 or 4 others that I highly recommend, but I don't have listed on here. The point being, you want to go out and do at least one of these, and possibly 2 or more, because what this gives you back is a somewhat consistent message of how you appear to other people, or what strengths you appear to have when you go and take these tests and assessments. Some of them are, well, I would hope many of them are strengths you already know about, but some of them will be things you hadn't even had a clue about, or even thought, hey, this is the way I present myself, or this is how I come across to people. A even more effective method for figuring out how you come across to others is to actually actively seek the opinions of others. And this was not only a difficult task, but for me it was a daunting task, because now I had to go ask people, what do you think of me? And no, maybe some people are very comfortable with that. I'm very uncomfortable with that. I don't like that idea of saying, tell me what you think of me. But I stumbled across this in a book called Career Cred by a guy named Ryan Roten. If you haven't seen it, if you haven't gone through this process or this workbook, I recommend it. There are other things I've seen that do the same type of assessments of yourself, or self-assessments, but this seemed to be pretty straightforward, and it was a way for you to ask people specifically and have them give you good quality answers and feedback back, because that's another thing, is sometimes people are likely to just say wonderful and glowing things about you and not really tell you what they think, and that's not going to do either of you any good. You really want them to give you the good and the bad. The good is what you should be highlighting. The bad is what you should be working on and trying to change or improve. But go through the steps in that book and learn about, hang on, I'm jumping all around here. Learn about who you are and how you come across. That will inform you and your brand statement, and that's what you'll take and put out on your social media platforms. That's part 1 of what is your story. Part 2 is your skills inventory. And your skills inventory is nothing more than, and again, I like spreadsheets, it's nothing more than a listing. I don't know how easy this is to read. I will be happy to share slides with anyone that wants them, and you can blow this up. But it's a 3-column spreadsheet. That's a resume subsection. I just kind of put in here, what part of my resume would this skill appear in? Or a resume section, then the subsection, and then the skill. And So what I have in here are things like a summary statement, demonstrated strengths, things that I know I'm good at, either because I know that I am and I've done it before, or because in my assessments that I did and in my questioning of my network of what do you think of me, they've told me what my skills are. And so I'm putting out there on my skills inventory the same thing that people are seeing in me when I engage with them. So it's important to do that and understand that. Education, any and all education you have, any professional training you have, and I want to stress with skills inventory, I look at this as kind of an Amazon warehouse. You know, there's everything in an Amazon warehouse. But the only thing that's important when you place an order is what you've asked for. And that's what they're going to go pull off the shelf, and that's what they're going to ship to you. Your skills inventory is not your resume. It's what you will use to build your resume. And if you've worked for any number of years, and particularly if you've pivoted from one career to the next, you've got a whole bunch of skills that probably, some of which will absolutely apply in whatever the next job is you're looking for, and some of which will not apply. But I emphasize that you still need to put them in your skills inventory and build that, because what you do is you use this as a reference when it's time to build the specific resume that you're sending to an employer. And I'll tell you why I do it this way. There are lots of different skills that you have. You have technical skills, achievements, accomplishments, maybe community service that you've done, positions you've held, different kinds of education, training, or interests or soft skills. And they're different across many different jobs. I have a very hard time when it comes time for me to build my resume for the next job search, remembering things that happened 20 years ago, sometimes yesterday, to be honest, but mostly 20 years ago. And if you've got it in your inventory, as you glance down through it and build a resume, you can say, oh yeah, 20 years ago I did do this and they're asking for it in this job. So you don't have to fish around and remember stuff that happened a long time ago. And so that's why I look at this as an inventory. Build it over time. The other thing is, as you're speaking to people in your networks, and especially former coworkers and former supervisors, part of that conversation might be, remember when we did this particular project and we did this and this and this. And as you're having that conversation, you realize, yeah, we did do that. And that's not even anywhere in my resume or in my skills inventory. Use the opportunity of networking with these people to build your skills inventory, because they're going to remember things that you did on that job that you have completely forgotten about. So that's it for what is your story. We're on to the third tenet, which is the value that you bring. So you've now built your network, and you have a good list of people in your 3 different networks and built out your social network, and you know your story. So you have clearly taken the time to understand yourself. Now what you need to figure out is who values that. What companies value that? And there's a few ways to go about figuring out the value that you bring. The first thing is to do some industry and job research. So the industry research, read and learn about industry trends. This comes from what I was saying in Industry Network, where you're connecting with thought leaders or you're attending industry events and or meetups. This is where you're going to do your research and read and learn about what's going on in that industry. Subscribe to blogs, podcasts, or any feeds of information and data that pertain to that particular industry. And then when and if industry trade shows ever resume, and I've actually started to hear about a few that are slated for January and beyond that look like they're going to happen, then when and if you can, you want to try to attend industry trade shows, because that's a very concentrated group of people who many of them have been entrenched in that industry for a long time. And there's a lot of information and a lot of networking that can take place at a trade show. Sometimes they're expensive to attend, but if you know this is where you want to be and where you want to go and the industry you want to work in, if it's $500, $1,000 to attend it, it might very well pay off quickly and get you into what you're trying to do. The second part of this is job research. So once you've established the industry and where you want to go, now you want to look at the jobs that exist in that particular industry. So gather at least 6 examples of each type of job that interests you in your chosen industry. And let me clarify what I mean by that. Let's say you're a project manager currently, and you want to look at 6 different project manager jobs in the industry that either you're in or that you want to move to. But maybe they also call a job title product manager, and it's really pretty similar to what a project manager might do in that industry. So look at those 2 different job titles and do some research on those. What you want to do is download those job descriptions and put them all into one document and deconstruct them to determine what keywords and skills that you need to have in your resume. And the way I deconstruct, the first time I did this, I actually downloaded 12 job descriptions and I went through and I counted keywords. It took me about a day to go through and count, and I just took a running count to see which ones appeared more often than others. And then I discovered word clouds, which I found to be a much, much easier way to do this. You can take all the job descriptions, plug them into one Word document, and then go to either wordclouds.com or wordle.net and have it generate a word cloud. And what that does essentially is these words like leadership and goals and building and performance, these are the ones that appear most often in all those job descriptions. And then as they get smaller, manage, development, regulatory plans, procedures, then they appear a little less often than the big words, and so on down to the very small ones. The point being, you want to start pulling these words out. You want to go back to your skills inventory, and where you used a word like management of a team, maybe you want to change that to leadership of a team, because they're using the word leadership more often than management in that particular type of job description. Why is that even important? If you want to go speak to someone whose native language is Spanish, you're going to have a much greater chance of effectively communicating with them if you also speak Spanish. And it's no different in doing a job search. These job descriptions are written typically, but not always, but typically by the manager. And so the words and the language that they're using in the job descriptions are the words and the language that they're familiar with. On top of that, if it's going into a database where it's searching against these words in the job description, if you use the exact same word and not a similar word, then you have a higher likelihood of your resume bubbling up to the top. But I want to emphasize, I don't recommend that doing this is what will improve your resume and improve your chances of getting an opportunity to have an interview. What will improve your chances of getting an opportunity to have an interview is to have a resume that's solid and matches these words, and network your way into a conversation with the hiring manager. So, and the next part of what value do you bring? You understand the industry better. You understand the types of jobs and the ones you want to go after in that industry. Now you need to do your company research. You need to specifically start to drill down into what and who are the companies that have the types of jobs I'm interested in, and those become my target companies. If you can see this, and I'll show it in a slide later, you're honing everything down to a fine fine point as to what you're going to apply for. And this is what gets you out of the I sent in 370 resumes and only got 20 responses. When using this system, I've been able to send in as few as 7 resumes to get 5 interviews and 3 job offers within 5 weeks. So it's narrowing everything down. It can work if you work it this way. So build a list of what those companies are and use LinkedIn and other tools to start identifying and connecting with individuals that are within that company. And it may be directly people on the team that's hiring for that or the hiring manager for that, but it could be people in other parts of the company that somehow you're connected or linked to. Maybe they're a first connection. Maybe they're a second connection linked through somebody you know very well. And you can start to build those connections, reach out to those individuals, and ask them questions. Do you know about this particular department? Do you know about this job? What can you tell me about the hiring manager for that job? And you're networking and building working your way into that company. I say not HR unless you know them. If you call HR gets thousands of resumes, and most of the time they are not even likely to return a phone call if you leave a message. So if you happen to get somebody on the phone, unless there's some connection and reason why they should talk to you, they're really kind of looking at you as one of 1,000 other people who are trying to get that same job. And they'll usually just direct you back to the website, go ahead and apply. And if your resume, pops up, we'll give you a call. So you don't want to spend a lot of time trying to network into HR unless it's an HR position that you're looking for. Start to add those key players that you identify in this process to your network lists, whether it's professional, personal, if you come across people you know real well, or industry. And don't sweat a lot over, should this be a professional contact or an industry contact? I kind of do it that if I know them and have had conversation with them, I'll move them into my professional network list. If I don't, then they're just in the industry and I want to get to know them. So those are the things you need to do to identify and hone in on the jobs that you're going to apply for. And hopefully by doing that, you're only applying to a small handful of jobs, but you're getting a high percentage of response back. And what will happen is you'll end up getting an interview. So here's where we talk about a couple of other pieces that you should do in your preparation for a job search before you even send a resume in. Questions to answer. you need to research the types of questions that you might be asked. And you can do this sometimes on Glassdoor or Google. You might be able to do it from people you've come across that have interviewed for similar positions at that company, and ask them, what types of questions were you asked? This is another good networking thing to do at Launchpad Job Club or other meetups like that. Speak to people who have been out interviewing and find out, what have they been asked. You want to prepare the answers in advance for the following types of questions. Specific skill questions. Every job has specific skills that you need to do in that particular role. And so, you've applied for this job, anticipate what might be the questions that I'm asked for this and what's going to be my answer. And write that answer out. Write the question out, write the answer out. Behavioral questions. These are more and more common. You'll be asked behavioral questions in a savvy interview, because what they're trying to do is not find out how many years of Java programming do you have and code this thing for me. They're trying to find out things like, how are you going to work and behave in this team that I have? Are you going to be disruptive to the team? Are you going to be productive to the team? Or are we going to spend a lot of time trying to drag you along and get you to do things? Or are you going to take initiative and get things done? So understand you can do a bunch of research out on the internet for different types of behavioral questions. Write out several of them and have your answers already prepared and written down, by the way. I keep saying that. And then there's off-the-wall questions. There's always interviews where you might get an off-the-wall question. I don't really have a great way to to prepare for those. But when you do get them, you want to understand that they're trying to see how you think on your feet, typically in an off-the-wall question. How do you think when you're thrown a curveball? And so a lot of times the way you answer off-the-wall questions is you ask for clarification on what it is they want to know, and they'll drive it to something that you can pinpoint and respond to. And then the last part of the questions to answer is rehearse your answers until fluid. And I'm going to just kind of emphasize that. I'm not yelling at you by putting it in big letters, but I feel like I ought to yell at a lot of people about questions to answer, because in addition to helping thousands of people prepare for jobs, I've interviewed thousands of people, and I clearly understand, and I can pretty much tell within a short period of time, people who are winging it in the answers and people who have prepared thoroughly. And think of it this way. Any Academy Award-winning actor was given a script way back when, before they ever started filming, and they rehearsed that script not only till they just knew the words, but until they could deliver the words in such a way that it seemed natural. And the only way for you to do that is to write down the questions, write down your answers, and then rehearse them until you're giving an Academy Award-winning performance at an interview. And I don't mean to say that an interview is a performance and you're trying to put an act on. It should be genuinely you, but you will be better at being genuinely you if you practice the questions and answers ahead of time, either in front of a mirror or with other people. And then at any point in the interview, you're going to come to do you have any questions for us? Now, hopefully, and I do a whole nother presentation on how to prepare, how to take control of an interview. Hopefully, you've already asked questions in the process of them asking you questions. But you will inevitably come to a point where they say, do you have any questions for us? And you better have them. you want to, based on all of this research that you've done in preparation for submitting your resume to this job, you should have at least a dozen questions that you're prepared and ready to ask. And that may seem like a lot, but if you think of, and you don't have to ask all of them, but if you think about it, there's a good chance that half a dozen of those are already going to be covered just in the process of back and forth in the interview. So those are throwaway. Don't ask them again, because you won't come across well if you ask a question that's already been covered in the interview. You have the others in your back pocket because you want to at least ask a couple of questions, if not everything that's on your list, so that you get the answer to it. An interview always is and always should be a two-way street, and you should always look at it. Never look at it that way. Never look at it like, I'm going in and I hope I answer all the questions correctly so that they give me a job offer. You want to go into it with, I'm going in, I'm prepared, I'm going to answer all their questions, but I've got a few of my own that I want to know. What kind of company is this? What kind of people will I be working with? And what can I expect? And what is expected of me in that role? So be very specific and pointed in your questions. Vague questions don't come across as well as a very specific and pointed question. Make sure that that reflects your company research that you've done. And this is where I say we've kind of narrowed all this down. You've built out your network, you've defined your story, you know what the value is, and you've submitted to these positions. So now you should be pursuing on a regular basis your ideal job. And that might mean that for some jobs you look at, you're going to have to say, no, that's not my ideal job. I'm not even going to bother to apply for that. At that point, when you've applied for the job, that's when you start thinking about the references, because your references are likely going to come from your network. And if you're lucky, those references are going to come from people within the company because you've networked with people within the company. If you can put down the name of somebody that even works in a different department, but that person might know or can go to and say, what can you tell me about Victoria or about Tina? Then they're going to be able to give them at least some information, some level of comfort that they're making a good hire. So the references you should use references in the following order. Always use professional references first and foremost whenever you can. So current or former supervisors. I say supervisors, and that's underlined because when I want to check references, I want to talk to the person that you reported to, because I want to know what kind of employee were you and how did you support the team for that particular supervisor. Then current and former coworkers. I consider them as valid references, but I do know that you can always have coworkers who are going to say nice things about you, and that's less of a valid reference for me personally as an interviewer than a supervisor. Professors might be a third potential reference, because again, especially if you're retooling yourself and learning new skills, they're going to be able to speak to your passion and the energy you brought to your work in that classroom. And any professional who can speak to your work product and your work ethic. Now, personal references, sometimes we use those. You can, if you don't have 3 or whatever number they're asking for of the others, but I put them lower on the list. A friend or someone with a professional background, maybe another church member or longtime family friend. These are less effective references unless for some reason that the person with the professional background maybe is in the area or industry that you're trying to make a move to and you've not ever been in that before. Because then that person can speak fairly effectively to your character. Wow, the last piece is the resume. Remember I said most people start with their resume and get that right and submit it. I don't even bother with the resume, and I suggest you don't even bother with the resume until you've done all these other things. Because then what you'll do is you'll end up having, because you'll know one or two types of jobs that you want to pursue, you'll end up having more than one version of your, what I call your base resume. The resume that has most of what you do in there, and it's lined up with that particular type of job because you've pulled that information out from your job research. And then you want to use your skills inventory before you actually submit to a job to go back down through that skills inventory and peruse it to see, are there any skills in there that I should have in my resume for this job that I don't? And then track submittals of each version of your resume individually. The reason is, again, I use a spreadsheet for this. You're going to tweak your resume for each and every job you submit to, and you want to be able to go back to that version of it if and when you're called for an interview. And that's it. That is what the employment puzzle is. These four corners, all these edge pieces, and then again, you're not filling in the middle, the references in the resume, until you've done all this. Hopefully, that's useful information and a useful systematic approach for you, and it makes sense. I don't want to let you go without offering up something additional of value if you want it. And in exchange, I'd ask you to subscribe to a list I have where I continue to send out additional information to people. If you want to use this link to go to 10 video interview tips that I put together, what that will do is it will take you to this page where you can put in your name and email address, and you are subscribing to get these 10 tips. You can unsubscribe at any time, and I don't share this information with anybody. But I will use it to continue to contact you and help you in your job search if you want to get additional tips and information. If not, then there are other ways to get a hold of me, and these are the ways you can do that. And I'll leave this screen up and take any questions that anybody has from here till our time is up.
I'll tell you, Chip, so far, that was great. That was really useful information. The most common comment is the fact that they love your presentation. They love your metaphor of the puzzle. They are all hoping to get a copy of it if possible. I told them that usually the PowerPoint presentations of our speakers are incorporated into our videos, and they're accessible. It's accessible through the our YouTube channel. But in your case, it could be that if you're willing, that you might want to, make it available to us. Somebody asked if it was possible for you just to put in the link to your PowerPoint presentation, if you're willing to share it.
Yeah, I'll get that over to you and to Shannon, and you can do whatever you need to do to put it up there. I don't know if you recorded this. You're certainly welcome to, use a recording of that too. Or if somebody wants to send me an email at that email address, I'll send it to them directly. Either any and all of those ways work for me. This information is no good if I'm holding on to it. It belongs, to everybody to use it, hopefully, in a successful job search.
Yeah, well, it's a lovely way to communicate a complicated process, really, and you make it very simple, and it's brilliant. I love it. I just think it's great.
And I wish I could take credit for it. I mean, I put the time in and kind of built it out, but if it weren't for the conversation with one of my kids where, it was one of the, have you ever seen someone have a light bulb moment where they're like, you try to explaining stuff to your kids in the first place can be difficult, but especially a job search. And as soon as I said puzzle, it was this, I could see the light bulb light up. And I'm glad to hear that that's what other people take away from this, because to me, that's always, it's been very clear to me that all this stuff needs to happen before you go look for a job. Um, but I didn't have a clear way of relaying that to anyone until this puzzle thing came along.
Yeah, I really think it's great. One of the problems that we discuss all the time is that when you're very first faced with a job search, it's enormous and overwhelming, and you don't even know where to start. And when you think of it as a jigsaw puzzle, and of course, you start with the border and you start with the corners. You find those corner pieces, those go down there first, and they're the anchors. And then,
Right.
what fits into those. And you just have made that whole concept really simple. And all of your subgroups of, the different individual steps that you take within those, it was great. It was very,
Yeah.
very helpful, and a way to organize it in your brain, so that you can clearly identify a plan going forward. What's going to be my goal today? I'm going to do everything it takes for this puzzle piece, and what's going to be my goal for tomorrow. So it's beautifully done.
Good. And the other thing to note about that is things like the corners, the networking. You start with that and you build a baseline, but you continue to build that out over your entire career. It's never done.
Sherry has raised her hand. Sherry, unmic yourself and ask your question. Or I guess I should say mic yourself and ask your question.
Yeah, there you go.
Shannon, do you have?
I don't see.
Is she able
I
to?
don't believe Sherry has the ability. I think she's.
Oh,
yeah.
well, she's been writing notes. She says, let's see, Sherry's latest
Here we
comment
go.
was way to organize, build a baseline. Question, oh, here, how might friend, family, church, job references be useful?
So I'll give you an example, just personal history. There, I go to, or when I was in Austin, I went to a church out by Lake Travis, and there was a gentleman there who was very highly placed at Whole Foods. And, Whole Foods is one of those top 100 places, best places to work, or at least it was maybe before Amazon came along. I don't know what it's like now. And I never did, I never pursued this, but I always thought, maybe I'd like to see what kinds of opportunities there are at Whole Foods. And that person would be an ideal person to approach and say, Todd, can you tell me about Whole Foods? What's it like to work there? How's it structured? How does their HR work? And et cetera, et cetera. Just, you never know. A church group is such a diverse collection of people from a bunch of different backgrounds. And you never know where there's someone there in a group like that. Same thing with sports teams or any of these others. It's a diverse collection of people that kind of the Kevin Bacon game, right? If you go 2 or 3 degrees down, somebody's going to be able to help you network into where you want to go.
One of the things to remember about all of these groups that he mentioned is that you have to engage. You can't just go to a church service and sit there and listen and tithe and leave. You have to, if you're on a committee with someone, or you mingle and network afterwards. Lots of times, places will have that little opportunity, and you strike up conversations. For example, the reason that we have a partnership with Indeed is that Brendan Stern, who was our initial contact, he reached out to us because I met him at our church, and he didn't realize until we struck up a conversation what I did. And I didn't know at that time. Well, at that time, he didn't even work for Indeed, but he remembered that I had a job club. And when he got the Indeed job, then he reached out to us and said, would you like us to partner? And so there's that piece, and you have to uh, get in a smaller group so that you can have a conversation with somebody, and don't think of your conversations as being necessarily, here's somebody, I'm going to strike up these conversations and see if I can find somebody who's going to help me find a job. No, I'm going to strike up a conversation and hear their story and see how interesting these people are. Don't think of it in terms of what you can get out of these people. Think of it in terms of, I'm going to meet some interesting people. And eventually, just with Brendan, from day one, it was not a relationship. But later, it morphed into something that has been really, really beneficial for both Indeed and for Launchpad.
Yeah.
Here's another question. Based on your consulting, what are the puzzle pieces that you see people get stuck or have a problem with moving forward?
Well, what it seems that I hear a lot from people is the networking part. They're not comfortable doing networking. And so I want to kind of circle back with your point that you were making, Kathy. I highly recommend to everybody, if they've never read it, read and it's an old book, but it just is advice that will not go away, and that is How to Win Friends and Influence People. It talks about approaching people not with how can you help me, but how can I learn more about you and your situation and your story. It is based on the simple tenet: be more interested in other people rather than trying to be more interesting. I think that people get hung up on the networking part because they think they have to go up and strike up a conversation and immediately get that person interested in whatever it is they say or do. And that as soon as you flip the narrative and try to be more interested in them, you'll be amazed at what comes back out in your direction in terms of information or contacts. So that's the biggest, I think, piece that people really struggle with is the networking part. But if the industry network, trying to build that and not knowing anything about an industry, people are intimidated because they think they'll come across as ignorant or uninformed. That's why you need to go out and do that research and inform yourself. You'll still be ignorant and uninformed in compared to someone who's been in an industry for 30 years, but you'll be better informed.
Okay, we have a clarification from Sherry where she said, Chip, good point. I meant to qualify that question as job application references. How might, friends and family and church be good job references when you've not worked with them before? And then we also have another question. You can answer hers again if you want, or you can move on to this one, which is, beyond the corners, is there a rationale to the position placements of the tiles?
Well, first, let me go back to the reference part. I did say that those references, those personal references, would be the last thing you use. But again, I'll use the Whole Foods example, or you could use the Indeed example. If there's a person in one of those groups that works at that company that you're trying to get into, then they could be a very strong reference for you in submitting. So if I wanted to go to work for Whole Foods, I might reach out to Todd and say, hey, Todd, I'm applying. If I put you as a reference, would you be willing to serve as a character reference for me? They wouldn't be able to speak about your work necessarily, but would you serve as a character reference? And that can be a very, very, especially depending upon where they're placed in the company, that could be a very strong reference. Short of that, I'd focus on the professional references and supervisors primarily. So give me the second part of the question, the second question.
The second question, by the way, I knew a person one time who, when they checked their professional references, they got a company that said this person was not eligible for rehire. And I can't remember if they gave them details about something that had happened or if there was a question about ethics or whatever. But then the prospective company went to their personal references, who were things like religious leaders and that sort of thing, and checked with them and said, I've heard some questionable feedback about this individual. Can you clarify, or can you give me your impression of their morality or their ability to follow, I don't even know, the ethical policies of a company. And so they, as a secondary resource, they went to those folks. So the other question was about the placement of the tiles. So it says, beyond the corners, is there a rationale to the position placements of the tiles?
Only in that after the corners, there's the edge pieces. And I would say, and they're not in any particular order there. In fact, I've kind of talked about reordering them just slightly so that they seem like they're conjoined. Like the question ones are at opposite ends of the puzzle, and I'm thinking maybe they ought to both be on the bottom. But the point is, start with corners, fill in all the edge pieces. Once you've done all that, then references and resume. So there is rationale to why references and resume are in the middle. I want to be very clear that you do all the other stuff first and put references and resumes way out at the end of the line, because there's just no sense in trying to use that tool. Remember, I said a reference is just a tool. To use that tool until you've figured out how to sharpen that tool and make it really be effective.